Alright, hello again, Jeff Scott of Blackhawk Technical College, trying to come at you right now with Part 2 of Chapter 8, Introduction to Table Views for the 152-153 Swift class for the spring 2014 semester. Still having problems, and I went in and tried to actually compile the version of the book's, A-Press's version of the code, and it had errors also, which of course isn't a good thing. So I'm just going to go on and hope that I can figure out whatever the problem is. We'll see. Okay. So I left off on about page 256, and ideally, when we ran the on 256, we would run the program, and when we ran the program, we'd get output. Well, kind of hard to run the program and get output when there's an error in your code. Now, interesting because there are a lot more errors in the book's code. So I don't know, I guess that's kind of bad news in that in what's to come, there might be yet further errors. Okay. Ideally, when we ran it, it would have looked like this. Now you can hopefully see the problem with it, and that is that right now it looks kind of ugly up on top here because that's the status bar up on top. And it's really close. So in other words, when the program was first created and we created this shouldn't have been right up butted up against the top. So I mean, literally all we'd have to do would be to click on here and move it down a bit. Alright, and that's what they're talking about. Now I don't want to go on to it any more than that. So the author says, as long as you're doing this, click Resolve Auto Constraint Issues, Update Constraints, so that should fix that. Okay, and they tell you to run it again, but again, since I'm having problems with it, it wouldn't make much sense to try to run it again. Alright, now what we're told to do next, and I'm going to have to do two things here. So first let me open that up, good, and then let me open up Finder. And this is the A-Press folder, and again, I can run this for you, but they've got a lot more errors in it than I do. So it says here, drag the files star.ping and star2.ping from the star image folder. There's star image. Oops. And we're supposed to grab the star2 star.ping and star2.ping to the project's X assets folder. Oops. There's one. Of course, we want to copy. And you see it there. There's star2. I'll do the same thing. Should be able to minimize this now, and again copy. Alright, so those are both in there. Alright. Then what we're told is in our code that we're typing right here, before we return the cell right there, we are to come in here and let image equals UI image named star. What this is going to do, just so you're aware of it, is it's going to put a little image by each name that's in the list, and the one that's highlighted, so that And I think that's blue, the regular star image, but the one that's highlighted will be a green star, and I think it's a little bit bigger too. All right. So they mention on the bottom of page 258, each cell has an image view property of type UI image, which in turn has properties called image and highlighted image. The image given by the image properties appears to the left of the cell and is replaced by the highlighted image if one is provided. All right, so as they mention and they show in figure 8.8 on page 259, it says now you'll notice that all rows have a star by them, and the one that's highlighted, a blue star by them, and if you select any row, it changes from blue to green, and that's the star2.ping file. All right. So, bottom of page 259, the work you've done with the table so far has used the default cell style shown in figure 8.8. But the Uitableviewcell class includes several other predefined styles, including image. If an image is part of the specified style, it's displayed to the left of the table cell, and you sort of just saw that. Text label, which is the cell's primary text. In the case of the Uitableviewcell_style.default, which we've been using so far, the text label is the only text shown in the cell, and detail text label, which is usually used for an explanatory note or label, and you'll see that in a little bit. All right, so we're supposed to come in here and add the following code in here to our file that we have right here. All right, so we're supposed to put in yet more code right here, and this also in the book at least blew up. So now it's interesting, I'm not getting errors there, but there were errors right there when you try to compile it in the book, compiling the book's code. All right, and as mentioned, this is down towards the bottom, middle of page 260. The author says, all we've done here is to set the cell's detail text. We're using the string Mr. Disney, and it's funny, they don't show putting a period there in the code, but they do show it in the examples, and I like it better with a period anyway. All right, it says we'll use the string Mr. Disney for the first 7 rows and the string Mr. Tolkien for the rest. When you run the code, you'll see something that looks similar to figure 8.9 on the bottom of page 260. And what that says is, right now we don't see it, and that's because we're using the default style. So they want us to come up here and change so that if the cell equals nil right here where we've got the default, they want us to change this to subtitle. And they say if you run it again, you'll see something underneath it. And if you change it from subtitle to value 1, you'll see something else, again, the middle of page 261. And then finally, they say if you change it from value 1 to value 2, you'll see yet something else when you run it. Now, again, I'm still going to have problems. I still can't run it because of the error that I have right here. I'd like to be able to figure out what that error is, but as of right now, not sure exactly what it is. So they say that now that you've seen these, which we haven't, but you've at least seen how to change them, We say change it back to the default. Later in the chapter, we'll talk about creating custom table cells. On the very bottom of page 261, the author says, you probably noticed that you're using expressions like cell exclamation point dot detail text label question mark dot text. And it says you probably or may be wondering what the question mark and the exclamation point and question mark are. All right. The return value of the DQ reusable cell with identifier method is any object question mark, which we then cast a UI table question mark, so we need either a cell exclamation point or a cell question mark to access its properties. Okay. Top of page 262, you may have noticed that we made our controller both a data source and a delegate for this table view, but up until now we haven't actually implemented any of the methods from the UI table view delegate protocol. Unlike picker views, simple table views don't require the use of a delegate to do their thing. The data source provides all the data necessary to draw the table. The delegate's purpose is to configure the appearance of the table view and handle certain user interactions that we'll look at, some now and some in the next chapter. So we're told in the middle of page 262 to add the following new method to our code. So that's the code that's down towards the middle of page 262. As shown here, the method sets the indent level. So row 0 will have an indent level of 0, row 1 an indent level of 1, etc. Because of the operator, row 4 will revert back to 0. So that's when we're doing this. So we're saying indented every row, the first row and then second, third, fourth, and then go back and repeat the pattern again. And if you run it, you should see something similar to what's shown on figure 813 on page 263. All right. The table's delegate has two methods that allow you to handle row selection. One is called before the row is selected, and it can be used to prevent the row from being selected. So what they're going to do next is they're going to set up a method so that the first row is not selectable. So we're supposed to add this function to the end. So again, that's saying that if it is row 0 that we're dealing with, return nil, which means it's unselectable, if that's even a word. All right. Func of TableView, TableView UI, TableView. Okay, that fixed that. So the method is passed an index path that represents the item about to be selected. All right. If it's the first row, meaning if it's row 0, then it returns nil, which indicates that no row should be selected. Otherwise, it returns the unmodified index path. So on the top of 264, the author says, let's also go in and add a delegate method that's called after the row has been selected. Oops. Clean this up a little bit here. Oh. Move this up a bit. Notice I put a lot of blank spaces in here. So what we should be able to do after doing all this stuff, oops, got a few mistakes in here. So it should be style. Okay, well, that fixed it. So it says, once we get to this point, if I can fix that other goofy error, the first row should not be selectable, and when you select, you should be able to select one of the other rows. The selected row should be highlighted, and the alert should pop up telling you the row that was selected, similar to what you see on figure 814 on page 265. The author mentions on the bottom of page 265, it says, note that you can also modify the index path before you pass it back. which would cause a different row or action to be selected. You don't do that very often because if the user is selecting one row, why would you want to present back to them that they're selecting another row? They do give an example on the bottom of page 265 that says if you wanted to only return odd number rows, you could set up some code so that if the user picked an even number row, that basically it wouldn't even show it. Okay, if you wanted to do that for whatever reason. All right, page 266. Let's say you want to change the font, size of the font used in the table view. In most situations, you probably wouldn't want to override the default font because that's what the user expects to see. But sometimes there may be a valid reason for doing that. So the author says that you can add the following code to our index path method, which is the one that we had way up here, the one we have the error in. So when we do this, right before we return it, so what we're doing is we're setting the font first to make it bold and 50 points. And mentioned on the bottom of 266, when you run the app now, as shown in figure 815, the values are in a very large font size, but they don't exactly fit in a row. In iOS 8, the table view automatically adjusts the height of each row based on the content, unless you tell it to otherwise. In this case, the new row is actually larger than it should be. So the author mentions that on the bottom of 267 that there's a couple ways to fix this. First, you can tell the table that all of its rows should be a given fixed height by using something like TableView.rowHeight equals 70. But the author says then on the bottom of the page, if you do need different rows to have different heights, you can implement the UI TableView delegates TableView height for row at index path method. So we're supposed to come down near the bottom here and then add another method. And see, this is probably about the most code that we've added thus far for any project. So I'm adding the code that's shown on the bottom of page 267 in the book. So we use the question mark colon operator that says come in here, and if it turns out that it's the 0th row, all right, which is kind of our main header row, make it size 120 point. Otherwise, make it size 70 point. As mentioned on the bottom of 268, there are more tasks that the delegate handles, but most of the remaining ones come into play when you start working with hierarchical data, which is the subject of the next chapter. All right, I'll have to, like I said, I'll have to go back, and now I'm going to remove some of these blank lines that are in here. All right, but I'm going to have to come back and see if I can figure out what that error message is right here. Could be that when the author wrote this, this was something that was allowable and is not allowable anymore. So maybe there's something that's replaced it. I don't know. But for right now, when I try, as you can see, if I come in here and save this, when I try to build it, it fails because of that error that's right there. Since it fails, I can't go any further with it. So on 269, we're told to start creating a new project, and I'd rather do that. All right? So hopefully we'll have a little better luck with that one. Again, I promise, though, I will try to look and see if I can find whatever the errors are. So I'm up to 269 on here. And as the author says, you can do a lot with table views right out of the box, but sometimes you want to format each row in different ways. There's three basic ways that you can format the rows. One involves adding subviews programmatically when creating the cell. A second involves loading a cell from a nib file. And a third is similar but loads it from a storyboard. It says we'll take a look at the first two techniques in this chapter, and in the next chapter we'll see a cell, creating a cell from a storyboard. So we're going to come in here, and hopefully this one will work out better, than the last one did, but we're going to attempt to build this. This is a new application with a new table view. In each row will display 2 lines of information along with 2 labels. The app will display the color and the name of a series of potentially familiar computer models and then show you some information about those. Alright, so I'm up to page 270. So we're told to come in here to Xcode and create a new project. This new project will be called Table Cells. It'll be single view, which I already had. Bring this up, save it. As always, once it comes up, I'm going to bring up the main storyboard, click on the view controller here and change the size to 4" just so it's easier for us to see in here. Okay, so we're told to add a table view and resize it so it fits the whole view, except the top of the table should be aligned with the bottom of the status bar and not with the top of the view. Okay, so let's come in here and set up a table view. And come up here, drag down so we're not showing. Alright, covering up the status bar, and I don't know what the heck happened here, but we do want this. Alright, I think that's what we wanted. Use the connection inspector to set the data source of the view controller. So you've seen this already. Then use the pin button to create constraints between the table edges and those of the parent view and the status bar. You can actually use the same settings as in figure 8.5 since the values you specify are the defaults. Okay, fine, but that should be fine. Okay. Up to this point, as mentioned on the middle of page 270, the standard table view cells we've been using have taken care of all the details of the cell layout for us. Our controller code has been kept clear of messy details. This keeps presentation logic out of the controller, which is a good thing to do. For this project, we're going to make a new Uitableviewcell Class, subclass of our own that takes care of the details of the new layout. So, it says select the table cells folder and we want to come in here and do a file, new, file. Remember, by default, it comes up with iOS source Cocoa Touch class, which is what we want. And we want to name this name and color cell. we want Uitableviewcell in the subclass. Okay, I believe that all looks okay. And I put it down here, which isn't what I wanted, so I'm just going to drag it up to here. Okay, there it is. Adding the code as, as shown toward the bottom of page 270. Okay, so the author mentions here we've added two properties, name and color, to our cells interface that the controller will use to pass values to each cell. We've also added a couple properties we'll use to access some of the subviews we'll be adding to the cell. The cell will contain 4 subviews, 2 of which are labels that have fixed content, and another 2 for which the content will be changed for every row. We're going to override the TableViewcell's init initializer to add some code to create the views we need to display. Now, we're going to add quite a bit of code here. So let's just start doing it. Now we're about to do a similar thing, but we're going to change this to color. So what I'm going to do is just cheat a little bit and paste that in. So yeah, those will all be removed in a minute. Okay. Again, we're going to almost repeat the same code here, just changing name to color. So I'm going to grab these lines right here, copy them to the clipboard, and then paste them in. I want to make sure that I don't, when I'm doing this, forget to change any of these names over to colors. So if I do, you're going to know real fast. Alright, so we've got one error here, require initializer. Init code must be provided with a subclass. By subclass, oh, I didn't put that at the beginning, I guess. Nope. Required initializer init coder must be provided by subclass of UI table view. Should have been up here. UI table view cell, that's what I wanted. Oh boy. Says they should be pretty straightforward. We created 4 UI labels and added them to the TableView cell. 2 of these labels contain static text. The label name marker contains the text name, and the label color marker contains the text color. These are static labels that won't change. Both of these have been right aligned. We'll use the other two labels to display our row-specific data. Since we've overridden a designated initializer, Swift requires us to also provide an implementation of coder. There we go. So add these 3 lines of code. So we move down towards the bottom here and hit enter. Okay, all errors appear to be gone. In Chapter 13, we discussed this initializer and why it's sometimes needed. Now let's put the finishing touches on our name and color class by adding some setter logic to the name and color properties. Change the declarations of these properties as follows. Well, I think that was way up on top here for name and color. So we have to change these 2 things. Var name string equals boom boom. Try to pretty this up a tad here. All right. We'll go over what this means in just a second after I've keyed it in. Hopefully haven't made any mistakes. Well, that says Voller, not color, so that's one thing. And the author mentions what we are doing here, there's how the errors are gone now, is adding code to ensure that when the name or color's properties value is changed, the text property of the corresponding label in the same custom table view cell is set to the same value. Okay? Alright, now it says let's set up the simple controller to display the values in our nice cells. Start by selecting viewcontroller.swift. Good time to save. And let's put some stuff at the top here. Now we're going to get that error at the top because we're going to have to write some code down on the bottom of the page for our delegate, our data source, so we'll get to that in a little bit. this up just a tad so it's a little easier to read. Again, as I sometimes do here, I'm going to, for lack of better words, cheat a little bit and copy this because we've got like 5 instances. And I'll just make changes to the instances. All right. So we've got a MacBook Air, MacBook Pro. iMac, Mac Mini, and a Mac Pro, and that one's black. Okay, so when we get in the errors, commas at the end. How about that? Okay, that fixed that. And in our view did load, we want to come in here and add we conformed the view controller of the UI TableView data source protocol and added a cell identifier name and an array of dictionary elements. Each dictionary contains the name and color information for basically one computer. The name for that row is held in the dictionary under the key name and the color under the key color. We also added an outlet for the table views, so we need to connect it in the storyboard. So we've got to go back and select our storyboard. So let's do that, bring that up. And we want to control drag from the view controller icon from the view controller icon to the table view icon. Oops, I didn't do that right, so wish I want to select table view there. Okay. Now I have this code at the end of our view controller.swift. I don't think I'm going to need this right now, so I'm going to close that. Let's do it this way. I'll close that. I'll bring that up. There we go. Again, as always, I'm going to add some blank space in here so it's that you're able to see as I'm typing stuff in. After we put this in, ideally at least, this is going to get rid of the error we have at the top. says we've already seen these methods in previous examples. They belong to the UI TableView data source protocol. Let's focus on the one with the cell for row with index path, since that's where we're getting into some new things. Here we use an interesting feature. A table view can use sort of a registry to create a new cell when needed. This means that as long as we've registered all the reuse identifiers that we're going to use for the table view, we can always get access to an available cell. What happens if we pass an identifier that's not registered? In that case, the method crashes. Although crashing sounds bad, in this case it would be the result of a bug that we would want to discover before we'd actually release something like this. So that's, for that reason, as mentioned on the top of page 274, we don't need to include a code that checks for a nil value, since that should never happen. Once we've got our new cell, we use the index path argument that was passed in to determine which row in the table is requesting a cell for, and then we use that row value to grab the correct dictionary for the requested row. All that's left to do then, as you see down towards the bottom, is to populate the cell data with the chosen row, and that's what we're doing right before we return the cell value. So we're told we should save and attempt to run it. Hopefully, unlike the last one, this will actually compile. It says we should see a table with rows that looks similar to what we see in figure 817 that was all the way back on page 269. So ideally, we're going to see this. All right. Give that a second. Again, we're up to page 274, and the next step is to try doing this instead of doing it programmatically like we just did, is to load a UI table view cell from a nib, which is next, starting on the middle of page 274. Well, there it is. Now let's see if we're going to get our data. No. Fatal error, unexpectedly found nil while unwrapping an optional value. Now, normally what that means is someplace in here I should have put in an exclamation point, and I didn't. And now I'm getting dinged for it. All right, so we'll go back. This is a pretty good place to stop. We'll go back, and I will try to find out where that is, rerun it, and if I do find out where the error is, I'll let you know. See what we've got here under the view did load. Let's take a look. Let's just take a look quickly at that. Well, it doesn't look like it's where the error is. So again, I will go back and double check everything, and I will do that and come back with the next part of this shortly.